So now we can dig into actually setting up our production-ready file storage for ActiveStorage in Rails. So the ActiveStorage overview guide is something you will reference very often when you're doing this setup because there's a lot of little details that you need to configure correctly. So if we go to the setup section and select S3 service, this is where we can follow the steps for setting up S3. So we need to first set up our config storage.yaml file. So we can pull that up. I've already opened it here, and there is a predefined example that we can uncomment that sets up a S3 service. It already knows to look into our Rails credentials for the AWS access key ID and secret access key. And it sets a default region that we want to update to match where our bucket is created. And we want to update the name of our bucket to match the bucket that we create in our AWS account. So that implies we need to go create an S3 bucket. So I've already logged into S3 and gone to the S3 buckets create bucket step. We can give our bucket a name. I'm going to name it after our application, the Learning Path blog. And we'll leave the default AWS region because that works for me, but you can change this to wherever you are in the world. And we want to select ACLs enabled. This access control list is what is going to allow us to flag files as public. So by default, everything will be private, and you would have to have tokens generated to give access to the files for a certain amount of time, maybe 30 seconds or 5 minutes or some short period of time, so that you would protect the files and you could give out access to them for just short periods of time. With the ACLs enabled, that allows us to tell Rails that we want these files to be public. Because we're on our blog, when we upload an image for our blog, we don't need it to be private. We don't need this to basically secure that so that you can only access the image for 30 seconds. You got to refresh and get a new token to try again if you ever want to reload that image. We don't need to protect that, but this is the Rails and AWS defaults so that files that you upload are protected out of the box, which makes a lot of sense. If you're Basecamp and you're building Basecamp's file uploads, everything you want is supposed to be protected because that's all your customers' files that they're uploading for themselves, not to share with anybody else. So it's secure by default, but we can go into the Rails config storage and add public is true to our configuration. And this, every time we upload files, will mark them as public. So that's where the ACLs come in. That public is true is going to set an ACL on our file uploads. So we'll leave the rest of this alone except for block all public access because we need public access for the files we're uploading. And I believe we can check all three of these boxes to keep this a little bit more secure. But this is going to say that we will allow public access to buckets and objects granted through a new ACL. So when we upload a file and we say, hey, mark this as public, this is going to allow that for us. So we're going to check this I acknowledge, and we are going to go down and create our bucket. So this will take a second. So once your bucket is set up, we can now go into moving or creating a policy. So you want to go to the IAM section and create a policy. This is going to be the permissions that our user is going to have in AWS. And we're going to lock them down to using S3 only. And we want to give them a handful of things here. So we're going to say list bucket so they can see all the files in the bucket if needed. We want them to be able to grab an object and read it out of the bucket if needed. And when we upload a file, we want them to be able to put an object to upload a file, and we also want to be able to delete objects. So when we delete it in our Rails application, we don't leave the file still on AWS as an orphan. That would be bad because then we'd be paying for a file that we could never reference again. And put bucket ACL or put object ACL is what we want. This is where we say this is a public file, and we can give it the public ACL for that to be applied. Now we can also restrict our policy here to a specific bucket, which is handy. So we can say this is for our learning path blog only. We can add that in here. And I believe we also want to add the learning path blog and all of the files inside of that. So the /*. We can add that to basically allow this to access any files or objects in them, as they like to call it, and the bucket itself. So this, I believe, is for like list bucket, would be able to, or would need the bucket itself, and then everything inside of it would be objects that we would be working with. So let's double check that and compare it to the Rails guides. S3 list bucket, put object, get object, delete object, and put object ACL. So we've got list bucket, get object, delete object, put object ACL. So you can reference this and make sure that all of that is exactly matching. And again, this put object ACL is only used for that public access because they are secure by default. So we will go ahead and review and give this a name, and we'll just call this learning path blog and maybe S3 policy as our name, and we can create that policy. Then we can go over to create then we can go over to create a new IAM user for our application. We call this one learning path blog. And this user does not need to log into the AWS console, so we'll click next and attach a policy directly. We'll look up the learning path blog S3 policy that we just created, and we'll add that to this user. So they will be able to access just that S3 bucket. So we'll create this user. And once the user is created, you can click on security credentials, and we will go down to access keys and create a new access key that we can put into our Rails credentials. And this is an application running outside AWS, so we'll click that one and we'll click next. We don't need a description. And here is our access key and secret. So you want to save these somewhere safe because you cannot access the secret access key again after you refresh this page or leave it. So we'll go into our Rails credentials by running editor equals code -- wait to open up VS Code. Wait for the file to be closed, and then it will re-encrypt it when it is done. So the -- wait here is important for VS Code to actually wait. And under here, we will say AWS access key ID, paste that in, secret access key. We can go back to the browser, click show. I'm going to copy this entire thing to our clipboard and paste that in. I did not copy to my clipboard, so we'll hit copy here and then paste. There we go. So we'll save this, close this, and then we will see in our terminal file encrypted and saved. And this happens only after we save it because of the -- wait. Otherwise, VS Code or whatever editor you have set in your environment variable could open, and then the Rails credentials would say, okay, time to encrypt, and it would do that before you even saved your changes in that file. So obviously, it needs to wait for you to make your adjustments first, but these commands don't always wait by default. So there we go. We have that set up, and we can go into our development configuration environments, development.rb, and we can change the ActiveStorage service to Amazon, which will tell it to use Amazon from here, which will then look at your Rails credentials and look for the AWS key and then the key ID and secret access key underneath that. We want to make sure our region matches. We want to change our bucket to learning path blog to match that exactly, and we can save this. And then the last step is we need to add the S3 gem to our gem file. And this is also mentioned here in the S3 section. I'm going to grab this, paste it into the bottom of our gem file, and then also make sure that our image processing gem is uncommented. And I think installing action text will uncomment that for you, and we are good to go. And last thing, we want to run bundle to install those two gems. And then if you haven't done this already, and I think I forgot to mention it earlier, I'll go edit that video and make sure. But if you missed that, the image processing gem depends on a tool called VIPs, and you can install VIPs on your Mac with Homebrew. With brew install VIPs, and this will go ahead and install that. And what this does is allows you to run commands to resize images. So Rails knows how to do that and passes it along to the VIPs tool, which is really efficient and fast at those things. And I'll go back and edit the previous video where we installed action text to mention this as well. And this instructions will vary depending on your operating system. So check out Vips' documentation on how to install this on Ubuntu or whatever. And I think this is installed by default, typically in production on Render or Heroku or Fly, so that you have access to this by default there. So everything is now configured from what we see here in the S3 section, except for we need to go down to the cores section of the docs. Cross-origin resource sharing is a feature of your browser for security, where if you try to upload a file from localhost 3000 to a different domain, like your S3 bucket, the browser is going to ask S3, hey, can we upload a file from 127.0.0.1 port 3000? And S3 will tell you what is allowed or not. So if we were trying to upload a file to there without a CORS configuration, it would say, no, you're not allowed to do that. And it can be pretty tough to debug some of this stuff. So luckily, Rails gives you an example CORS configuration we can copy paste and put under the permissions tab of our bucket. So it's at the very bottom here right now, at least in their current iteration of the AWS console. And the only thing we need to change here is the allowed origin. So we need to make sure that this allows 127.0.0.1:3000. And we also want this to handle the render domain that our application is running on. Now I'll paste that in here and we can save our changes. And this is going to allow us to restart our Rails app, pick up all of the Amazon configuration for file uploads. And if we refresh here and drag and drop a file into there, we'll first open up the JavaScript error console. And we'll drag and drop a file now. And what we want to see is that the file gets uploaded. You see a progress bar and it should turn green if it's successful. And what you want to see is there are no errors. And the network tab will also show you any issues. But these are the two requests for uploading a file. The first is the pre-flight request, which is an options request that asks Amazon what CORS information is available and what is allowed. And so Amazon sends us back and says, we allow credentials, we allow these headers, we allow a put request, and we allow this origin, which is what origin we are on. If that did not allow it, this would not be there or whatever, and then your browser would not be able to make the request, and you would see an error in your JavaScript console and on this network tab. So here we are going to then update our blog post, and if everything works successfully, we will see that this image is visible. But here we have the image, and if we try and open it, it says access denied. So this is disappointing, but as you set up this for the first time, any little mistake can cause issues like this. So if there's CORS problems, you need to look at your CORS configuration. But under permissions on our bucket, we can see that access to buckets and objects is not public. And that is because we need to uncheck this box here, block public access to buckets and objects granted through any access control lists. We need that to also support any of the new ones. And so if we save this and we upload a file, it was allowing a new one, but now that that file is saved there, we couldn't access the file even though it was already marked as public. So if we refresh our page, the file is still on AWS, and now it gives us permission to actually access that file through the existing ACL, which is the public read on this file. So now it works, and if we hit edit, it will also show up here, and we just want to make sure that that works as well. And uploading anything, let's fix our typo here. updating our blog post will not upload a new file. It will just save the existing one in this as a reference. So what's also neat about ActiveStorage and Action Text is it's all connected. So if we were to delete this image from our blog post, it's going to remove the reference to it and the backend in the database. And when it has no references, where that image used to be connected to this blog post rich text field, it's now not anymore. And ActiveStorage will actually go ahead and remove it for you. So if we refresh our Learning Path blog bucket, we now have no objects in here anymore. And so it has removed that automatically for us, and everything is managed for us on the back end, and we don't have to touch any of that. So that's pretty awesome. And everything we now have is working with Amazon. So we can go into our Visual Studio Code, go to the development environment. We'll put local back for our ActiveStorage service, and we'll update production from local to Amazon. And then we can commit all these changes in Git. So we have our ActiveStorage changes and so on. So we can go and add all of these. And if we commit this stuff and push it up to render, what will happen is it will start using Amazon S3 on our ActiveStorage file uploads. So we'll add Amazon S3 for ActiveStorage. Then we can git push and take a look at our Learning Path deployment to render, and once that is finished, we can refresh our blog and confirm that file uploads work, editing works, and all of that. So we'll give it a minute to finish deploying, and we'll try this out in production. Our render build has finished, and we can go to our blog, and we can go and edit our draft post and drag an image to upload. It was green. If we check our console for errors, I don't see any network errors. I don't see any errors otherwise. And we can update our blog post, and there we go. Our image was uploaded to S3. We can open the image in a new tab, and it points to our learningpathblog.s3.amazonaws.com and points to that file that we just uploaded. We can also go to edit to make sure it also renders here. The image URL is actually a different one. Because of the way that Action Text works, we can have these preview images and then the final image that's rendered out on our content. And so you will end up with sort of seemingly duplicates here. And if we were to go into our Learning Path blog in AWS, you'll see these are slightly different file sizes, even though they're the same image. And it's basically pre-processing that for the different use cases of it. So with ActiveStorage, you can create thumbnails, you can make a square version of your image, you can do all kinds of resizing things. And it's going to have these two different versions that Action Text creates for us, one for the editor and one for the public view of it. But if we delete this from our post, what it will do is drop the reference from our rich text area to that file upload that's in our database. And when that database record for the file upload notices that there are no references to it anymore, it will go ahead and delete itself from Amazon S3 in the background. So if we update our post and get rid of the image, what we can see in our bucket is if we refresh, there are no longer those two images that were uploaded with our editor. So it's keeping track of all of that and managing it so that we don't have orphaned posts or orphaned images when we modify a post. It takes care of that cleanup and everything for us. So we're not paying for file storage for images that we're not using anymore, which is cool. So Action Text and ActiveStorage is doing a lot for us. Behind the scenes, we had to write basically no code. We just configured it to use Amazon S3, and the rest of that was done for us. All the JavaScript, all the backend work, all of the tokens and authorization stuff to Amazon was handled for us, and we just got to sit back and relax and write our rich text editor with file uploads. So pat yourself on the back if you made it through all of this. There was a lot that we did. The building of the blog post models and the controllers and the views and the routes was a lot on its own. But then to go into ActiveStorage and actually follow these instructions, I've made mistakes recording this video like 5 times, so this is not something that's even easy to do for a senior Rails developer. So if you can get through this, you are well on your way to learning your Rails and your AWS and configurations and all of that stuff, and putting all this together. So pat yourself on the back for that, because that is quite an accomplishment. So now I think we are done with our blog. You can add features to this. You can customize it. Obviously, a lot of design work still needs to be done to really make this look nice, but all the functionality is there and works and is even ready for production file uploads, which is awesome. So we are going to finish this series here, and you can continue on to the next series where we build another Rails app and take a look at all the same things, but with different variations of some of the features that we will use in Rails. We can then go a little faster because we don't have to write all our routes purely from scratch just to learn that. And we can dig into some more exciting features of Rails and build another app to really help all of these things that we have learned sink in and become sort of second nature, where you can have some of these things memorized so you can focus on learning some of the more advanced features as we go through this. So that's it for this series. I hope you enjoyed it. Let us know in the comments below if there's anything else you would like to see, and we'll see you in the next Rails application series. Until then, I'll talk to you later. Peace.